Welcome to Legacy of Ages, a place where wars transform into stories. Initially, the war seemed like distant names on maps, in columns, and within the pages of newspapers. Then, Paris trembled from the deep hum of engines as monoplane bombers circled overhead, dropping not just explosives, but also leaflets warning that the German army was at the gates. Refugees choked the boulevards, their carts jammed against abandoned automobiles, creating a scene of utter chaos. The city's heartbeat faltered, descending into panic. Inside a dimly lit command office, General Joseph Galeni, lean and bespectacled, studied reports with unwavering calm. His voice cut through the pervasive fear. "I have received the mandate to defend Paris against the invader. I shall fulfill it to the end," he declared. Outside, artillery rumbled like an approaching storm, shaking windows in their frames. Weeks earlier, Germany had lunged westward under the Schlieffen plan, racing to crush France before Russia could fully mobilize its forces. Their armies smashed through Belgium's defenses, sidestepping France's heavily fortified eastern border. Cavalry scouts caught glimpses of Parisian steeples on the horizon, a sight that signaled their swift advance, which was as rapid as the rumors that preceded them. France, swept up in a doctrine of relentless offense, responded with Plan 17, prioritizing bright uniforms, fixed bayonets, and fervent spirit over meticulous preparation. The result was brutally decisive. At the Battle of the Frontiers, machine guns and modern artillery tore through outdated tactics. French formations dissolved under the weight of industrial firepower, their boldness punished by the harsh reality of iron. The French retreated in an orderly fashion, though bleeding heavily, while the newly arrived British Expeditionary Force fought delaying actions around Mons, striving to buy time. Each day they fell back deeper into the countryside, ceding ground to survive. Yet their withdrawal denied Germany the decisive encirclement that the Schlieffen plan required. A timetable built on clockwork precision began to slip, and whispers of this delay spread through the cafes and market stalls of Paris. Mothers clutched their children's hands tighter, sensing the impending danger. Shopkeepers stacked sandbags against doorways, attempting to fortify their businesses. The glow of the Eiffel Tower vanished each night as the city dimmed its lights, afraid to act as a beacon of death from above. Telegrams crackled with urgency, each message adding to the growing tension. Maps sprouted pins like thorns, marking troop movements and strategic locations. On the outskirts of the city, trains screeched into stations at midnight, disgorging entire divisions of soldiers. The soldiers marched through moonlit streets, their boots striking cobblestones in a grim percussion that echoed through the night. Citizens watched from behind shuttered windows, caught between dread and pride, offering water and whispered blessings, the last fragments of peace before dawn. The war that once marched across foreign valleys now pressed against Paris's ribs, threatening to suffocate the city. And beneath a sky stained grey by distant smoke, Paris braced itself not to fall but to endure. The Great Retreat carved its way across northern France like a slow-moving storm. Day after day, French and British forces yielded ground, not in panic, but with hardened discipline trading distance for precious time. Rearguard skirmishes flared along dusty crossroads, quick ambushes and sudden volleys, then vanished footprints as Allied columns slipped away before German artillery could lock in on their positions. Each clash bought valuable hours, and those hours mattered more than miles in the grand scheme of the retreat. German formations advanced behind ruined logistics, following rail lines smashed by their own urgency. Supply wagons groaned along rutted roads, their axles straining under the weight. Horses foamed at the bit, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Drivers snapped reins through clenched teeth, urging their teams onward. Ammunition shortages forced batteries to conserve fire, their once thunderous barrages shrinking into careful, measured shots. The deeper the Germans pushed, the longer their supply tail stretched, and the thinner it became, making them vulnerable. Still, morale remained high in German ranks. They fervently believed that Paris stood within their reach, and that the war's decisive blow was almost delivered. Officers unfolded maps atop overturned crates, tracing arcs of movement with pencils dulled by 3 weeks of marching across the country. Reports painted a picture of collapsing allies, struggling to maintain their formations. Yet, When scouts brushed too close to the French rear, they found not chaos, but order. Columns marching in tight files, artillery limbering cleanly, cavalry screens snapping shut like shutters against the wind. French General Joseph Joffre, stoic and methodical, used the retreat to realign armies by rail. Troop trains hissed into hidden sidings at night, unloading brigades who moved by moonlight to fill gaps that no German patrol ever saw. A Sixth Army rose near Paris, almost from thin air, quiet on the timetable, but destined to be thunderous on the battlefield. Meanwhile, German high command fractured beneath the strain of distance. Headquarters sat far behind the front lines, its orders traveling too slowly, stripped of vital context by the time they arrived at the troops. Armies operated like limbs without sensation, each reacting to its own limited horizon. Signals crackled with static, making communication difficult. Couriers rode through artillery's reach, their saddlebags flapping like wounded wings, disrupting coordination and making it difficult to maintain a cohesive strategy. The spine of the Schlieffen plan began to bend under the weight of these challenges. Paris felt the tremors of these shifts in the battle. Journalists reported sightings of German cavalry just 8 miles from the city's edge, sending waves of fear through the population. Bread lines grew longer, a sign of dwindling supplies. Street lamps dimmed early, plunging the city into darkness. Yet, the sight of fresh French troops marching toward the Marne River steadied nerves and offered a glimmer of hope. Citizens leaned from balconies, waving tricolor ribbons, their cheers thinning the fog of dread that had settled over the city. On the Marne's banks, the retreat paused, marking a crucial moment. The river's wide sweep offered space to pivot, to turn fear into a counterstroke that could change the course of the war. Officers studied the terrain beneath lantern light, marking ridges where guns could anchor and bridges where cavalry might spring forward. The air smelled of damp earth in anticipation, as though the river itself held its breath, waiting for what was to come. Behind them lay valleys burned into memory, landscapes scarred by the retreat. Ahead loomed ground that would decide the war's shape, determining the future of the conflict. The Allies had fallen back far enough, absorbing the initial German onslaught. Now jaws tightened, muskets were cleaned, and trenches were sketched into the soil. The Great Retreat, which had absorbed the German blow without shattering, prepared at last to return its teeth. Above the river, dawn's first light glinted off bayonets, sharpening every shadow and illuminating the landscape. The war that had swept across maps was about to collide with the land, and the land would decide who remained standing when the dust settled. Opportunity in war often appears not as triumph, but as error, disguised as something else entirely. For Germany, that moment came when General Alexander von Kluck, urged on by ambition, pivoted his First Army east of Paris instead of swinging wide to envelop it as planned. The movement looked elegant on the map, a perfect arrow tightening toward decisive victory. In reality, it pulled his flank away from safety, stretching his line like cloth thinning over a blade, weakening his position. Parisian air reconnaissance spotted dust trails and shifting columns, visual confirmation of the change. Pilots scribbled sketches with numb fingers as wind tore at their scarves, their bodies freezing in the open air. Soon, a leather satchel recovered from a fallen German officer confirmed the truth of the reconnaissance. Marching orders marked with arrows retreating from Paris's western arc, indicating a significant shift in strategy. Galini's spectacles glinted in the lamplight as he reviewed the map, carefully analyzing the details. A single sentence broke his silence, revealing his strategic thinking. "We strike where they are exposed." Around him, aides exhaled as though emerging from underwater, relieved by the general's decisive words. As Kluck's divisions moved south to coordinate with General Bülow's Second Army, they peeled units from their left, creating a vulnerability. That thinning hinge, once reinforced by distance, became a seam, a weak point in the German line. French scouts crept through orchards, surprised by how quiet the hedgerows had become. Machine gun nests lay abandoned, their barrels still cool to the touch, indicating a hasty retreat. Farther out, cavalry patrols found nothing but crushed grass and footprints leading away from Paris, confirming the shifting German movements. Silence in war is rarely comforting, and often an ominous invitation. But Kluck saw another truth. His officers urged caution, sensing a potential trap. Reconnaissance warned of massing French forces near Paris, a significant threat. He waved the reports aside, however, his eyes fixed on the French Fifth Army retreating before him, unwilling to divert from his pursuit. If he crushed their center, he believed France would collapse, securing a German victory. His staff marked new assault points on the map, indicating their intended targets. The gap at his back widened with every stroke of their pencils, increasing the risk. General Michel-Joseph Maunoir's freshly formed Sixth Army surged from Paris's outskirts at dawn, their bayonets catching the morning light. They slammed into Kluck's exposed flank along the River Ourcq, where German reservists, grey-haired men, and half-trained boys held shallow trenches behind crumbling stone walls, facing a formidable attack. Artillery roared from orchard ridges, shells bursting among apple trees that showered fruit and splinters in equal measure, creating a chaotic and dangerous scene. The French advance staggered, but it did not break, a testament to their resolve. Kluck reacted with ferocity, rushing reinforcements north in forced marches to bolster his lines. Soldiers pivoted mid-stride, their boots grinding dust into mud as they rushed to meet the threat. Orders snapped along the line like taut wire, transmitting commands quickly. But every battalion sent to hold the flank tore a thread from the German front, facing the British and French Fifth Army, further weakening the German line. The hinge strained under the pressure. Maps shifted as the battle lines evolved, colors curled inward, indicating strategic changes. Behind the lines, telegraph keys clattered with frantic urgency, a constant stream of information flowing. French code officers tapped messages in clipped sequences, words riding electricity faster than cavalry could gallop. Gap widening, forces realigning, strike possible, the messages conveyed. Each transmission tightened Joffre's jaw, his determination hardening. He summoned his corps commanders with quiet resolve, ready to issue new orders. The river, the ridges, the timing, they aligned like tumblers in a lock, creating an opportunity. As dusk settled, lanterns bobbed through bivouacs on both sides, illuminating the faces of the weary soldiers. French officers traced assault arrows across soil-smudged maps, planning their next moves. German adjutants redrew defensive lines, palms sweating onto parchment as they tried to adjust to the shifting battlefield. The wrong turn had already been taken, leading them into a precarious position. Now the ground itself began to tilt around it, creating an unstable landscape. Men slept lightly in shallow scrapes, their fingers curled around rifle stocks, slick with dew, always ready for action. Above them, artillery flashes pulsed like distant lightning, illuminating a profound truth that neither side yet fully grasped. A single decision had cracked open the front, and through that fracture, the shape of the war was already beginning to change dramatically. Morning broke over rippling wheat fields and low stone farmhouses as the French Sixth Army renewed its assault along the River Ourcq, pressing their advantage. Their rifles cracked in disciplined volleys, the sound echoing across the battlefield. Boots pounded forward through hedgerows, slick with dew, driving the attack. But waiting in the orchards were German machine guns and field batteries, positioned with ruthless precision, ready to defend their positions. The first bursts tore through advancing files, cutting branches and bodies with equal ease, showcasing the brutal efficiency of modern weaponry. Fruit thudded to the ground, rolled and split, the sweet pulp mingling with dust and cordite, a grim contrast of nature and war. German reservists, outnumbered nearly 7-1, fought with grim tenacity, anchoring pockets of resistance behind barn walls blackened by shell fire, refusing to yield. Their sergeants shouted hoarse orders, shifting squads like pieces on a board, buying seconds that mattered in the face of overwhelming odds. Each time the French gained a courtyard or hillock, concentrated artillery fire hammered them back, turning advantage into ash, showing the destructive power of artillery. Smoke clung low across the fields, obscuring friend from foe until muzzle flashes stitched the haze, creating a disorienting environment. French officers tried to seize momentum, waving flags and sabers, but modern firepower scorned heroics, making traditional tactics obsolete. Columns dissolved at the orchard line, men crawling into irrigation ditches, gasping as shrapnel hissed overhead, highlighting the vulnerability of infantry. A battalion of elite Moroccan tirailleurs pressed farther than most, only to be scythed down in minutes, their courage swallowed by the machine age, a stark example of the war's changing nature. Their losses echoed down the line, a warning carved in blood, a chilling reminder of the cost of war. Still, Marne refused to yield, remaining resolute in his mission. The flank had to bend, he knew, if they were to achieve their objective. Kluck felt the heat immediately, sensing the urgency of the situation. Reports flooded his headquarters, detailing his left flank cracking and his reserves inadequate. French infantry appearing where none should be, posing a new threat. He stripped units from his right to plug the breach, forcing regiments already weary from forced marches to pivot hurriedly north, stretching his forces thin. Couriers rode themselves breathless, their horses foaming and stumbling under the strain. Every reinforcement rushed to the flank, hollowed another seam elsewhere, creating new vulnerabilities. The elegant arc of advance now frayed at the edges, losing its original form. To the south, the British Expeditionary Force sensed opportunity in the absence of German troops, recognizing the strategic shift. Their scouts found gaps where German outposts had stood the day before, indicating a thinning of the German line. Officers exchanged glances, sharpened by instinct, recognizing the potential. Something was shifting on the battlefield. They advanced cautiously through farm lanes littered with abandoned shell crates, their senses on high alert. Bayonets lowered, expecting ambush, ready for a fight. But the hedges whispered only with wind, revealing nothing dangerous. Silence began to feel like both invitation and threat, creating a tense atmosphere. As the day wore on, neither side fully understood the other's exhaustion, each pushing themselves to their limits. Parched French infantry drank from horse troughs, their uniforms streaked with orchard sap and soot, showing the harsh conditions they faced. German gunners fought with blistered hands, barrels glowing faint red, each recoil rattling nerve and bone, taking a physical toll. Medics knelt beside craters, pressing bandages to wounds too large for cloth, whispering reassurance into ears already deafened by thunder, dealing with the horrific consequences of battle. At sunset, the fighting slackened into sporadic bursts, the intensity waning as night approached. The orchard floor was carpeted in crushed apples and spent casings, the sweetness soured by gunpowder, a haunting combination. Officers walked the lines in murmured council, assessing the situation, noting where trees splintered by shellfire offered crude cover, seeking any advantage they could find. Lanterns flickered behind low stone walls as men cleaned rifles and counted cartridges, preparing for the next day's battle. Each click, a reminder of tomorrow's work, a constant anticipation of violence. Night settled like a curtain drawn over frayed nerves, offering a brief respite. The smoke thinned, revealing stars cold and uncaring above the orchard's broken canopy, indifferent to the human suffering below. Beneath them, exhausted soldiers slept in shallow scrapes, rifles cradled against their chests, seeking a moment of peace. Kluck's reinforcements had held for now, but every battalion diverted left, pulled the hinge farther from its plan, exacerbating the strategic problem. And in the quiet between gunshots, you could almost hear a line beginning to tear, a subtle but ominous sound. By dawn, staff officers on both sides sensed a shift they couldn't yet fully see, a change in momentum that was not yet clear. Kluck's reinforcements flowed left like water poured into a fracture, thickening the line near the river Ock, but thinning everything south of it, creating a growing vulnerability. What had been a hinge between the First and Second Armies began to stretch into open space, a dangerous gap in the German line. German field maps smudged by sleepless hands still showed contact where none existed, an outdated representation of the battlefield. In war, a blank spot is never empty for long, presenting opportunities for the enemy. British patrols crept forward through hedge and hollow lanes, boots sinking into damp loam, cautiously advancing. Expecting fire, they found nothing, no pickets, no wire, only churned soil and abandoned cook fires still warm, indicating a hasty withdrawal. Binoculars swept empty fields fading into morning haze, searching for any signs of resistance. A captain traced the contour of absence with a fingertip and whispered, God help them! They've left a door open. Recognizing the significant opportunity they had been presented, runners bolted back through creek beds and sunken roads, their reports thinning the fog of doubt, confirming the British suspicions. News reached Joffre's headquarters like the snap of a bowstring, delivering the important message quickly. His staff clustered around the map table, their eyes widening as the gap's width expanded with each updated dispatch, realizing the scale of the opportunity. The general's voice remained calm, but the orders he issued were sharp enough to cut, decisive and clear. Pivot the French Fifth Army north, push the British Expeditionary Force into the opening, drive a wedge behind the German advance, he commanded, outlining his strategy. Months of doctrine about decisive battle suddenly mattered again, their training coming to fruition. Farther east, Bülow felt the grind of converging forces, sensing the mounting pressure. Under pressure from Franchet-d'Espéré's French Fifth Army and threatened by the British thrust, his right flank buckled, unable to withstand the combined assault. Reports arrived thick with urgency, describing the dire situation. Enemy columns massing, artillery probing, wire positions collapsing, signaling a crumbling defense. Bülow considered holding, but then imagined entire corps encircled by the jaws of Paris and the Marne, a terrifying prospect. With a bitter swallow, he ordered a withdrawal north of the river, a difficult decision with significant consequences. His staff froze, pens hovering above paper, knowing what a retreat would unravel, understanding the potential repercussions. Kluck received the news hours later, too late for elegance or a strategic adjustment. His army was now bent at an angle never drawn on Schlieffen's original blueprint, deviating significantly from the plan. He stared at the map as if willing the lines to realign, wishing he could undo his decisions. But retreat pulls at pride the way gravity pulls at stone, dragging down morale and creating a sense of defeat. He counterattacked south, hoping to break the French Fifth before the hinge collapsed entirely, trying to salvage the situation. Each mile gained forward cost him 2 sideways, further weakening his overall position. Across farm ridges and orchard lanes, Allied artillery pounded crossroads where German relief columns threaded like beads on fraying string, disrupting their supply lines. Shell bursts flung wagon wheels skyward, turning supply into wreckage, a chaotic and destructive scene. Medics dragged the wounded behind toppled carts, while horses screamed beneath broken harnesses, highlighting the brutal realities of war. The pressure was no longer a line, but a tightening fist, constricting the German forces. The Germans fought with practiced ferocity, refusing to give up easily. Machine gun nests pivoted, sweeping advancing columns and forcing men low into drainage ditches choked with cattails and mud, slowing the Allied advance. Rifle volleys cracked from tree line to tree line, sparking fear where no flame burned, creating a tense and dangerous environment. But the space between armies yawned wider, with every regiment pulled north, every maneuver born of necessity rather than design, stretching the German lines thin. Allied scouts reached the high ground by late afternoon and saw it clearly, a corridor nearly 30 miles wide, a significant gap in the German defenses. Nothing guarding the seam but fatigue and hope, a precarious situation for the German forces. Officers passed canteens, their hands trembling not from thirst but from consequence, overwhelmed by the situation. They had trained for battles, not opportunities born from errors, never anticipating such a dramatic shift in the battlefield. Yet the battlefield rewards those who step first, those who are willing to seize unexpected opportunities. As dusk bled across the Marne, lanterns bobbed along both fronts like drifting embers, illuminating the weary faces of the soldiers. French signalmen tapped coded messages that leapt across telegraph wire faster than cavalry could ever ride, relaying crucial information. British infantry angled deeper into the gap, their boots brushing wheat heavy with September's last warmth, pressing their advantage. Each step tightened the noose around 2 German armies, now turning inward, colliding with their own momentum, adding to the chaos. On a low rise behind the line, Galeni's aides marked the widening seam with charcoal strokes, outlining the strategic gap. To them it looked less like space, and more like an opening jaw, ready to devour the German forces. The ground below glimmered faintly in moonlight, tall grass bowing in silent testimony, bearing witness to the unfolding events. What had begun as a minor adjustment was now a fracture in an empire's ribcage, a critical blow. And into that fracture poured everything the Allies had left: boots, breath, and the quiet terror of men who sensed the world tipping beneath their feet, driven by a desperate need to turn the tide of the war. Night settled over Paris in nervous layers, a city on edge. Shuttered windows, dimmed lamps, hushed cafes, a city holding its breath. In Galeni's headquarters, reports bloomed across the map like bruises, detailing the shifting battle lines. Marne's 6th Army was holding, but the line trembled, stretched to its breaking point. He needed reinforcements now, urgently. Rail traffic was choked, making transportation difficult. Horse teams exhausted, unable to transport troops quickly. Then a spark of audacity cut through the smoke of doubt, a bold idea that could change everything. Galeni gave an order no staff officer had ever heard. Requisition every taxi in Paris, a seemingly impossible task. Within the hour, horns echoed across boulevards as crimson-liveried Renault AGs spilled from alleyways, a surge of activity. Headlights blinking like restless eyes, adding to the frenetic energy. Drivers were pulled from late suppers and quiet corners, some still in aprons, others rubbing sleep from their beards, disrupting their lives. Soldiers clambered into back seats, rifles wedged between knees, helmets scraping glass, a chaotic scene. Taximeters clicked politely, a habit in the face of history, oblivious to the momentous event. Crowds lined sidewalks, their cheers rising like steam, showing their support for the war effort. Children waved scraps of tricolor cloth, expressing their patriotism. Bakers pressed bread into soldiers' hands through open windows, offering a last bit of comfort. Drivers gripped steering wheels tight enough to pale knuckles, their nerves on edge, engines growling beneath trembling dashboards, a symphony of anticipation. At Galeni's command, the convoy rolled east, a river of headlights threading through the city's arteries, a symbol of Parisian resolve. Out of Paris, the moon gilded the countryside in cold silver, casting an ethereal glow. Engines hammered along dirt roads flanked by whispering corn, a stark contrast between the natural world and the war to come. In the distance, artillery flashes pulsed, brief blossoms against the horizon, marking where night turned soldiers into silhouettes, a dangerous and deadly environment. Some drivers averted their eyes, unable to face the reality of war. Others stared straight into the glow, knowing they were crossing a boundary between city life and the furnace of modern war, a point of no return. The cabs reached the forward assembly areas before dawn, accomplishing their mission. Doors slammed as soldiers poured into orchards already scarred by shrapnel, ready for battle. Officers thanked the drivers with hurried nods, grateful for their service. Clerks recorded fares on ledgers, absurd but symbolic, a commitment to fairness. Galeni understood morale was currency, a vital resource. If Paris paid its drivers, it hadn't surrendered its dignity, maintaining its sense of honor. On the return trip, the roads felt heavier, burdened by the weight of the experience. Drivers met ambulances rushing the other direction, a grim reminder of the human cost. Canvas sides swaying, stretcher poles jutting through flaps like broken ribs, showing the carnage of war. The smell of antiseptic and burned cloth clung to the air, a pungent and unsettling aroma. A driver pressed a hand to his mouth, realizing war was no rumor. It breathed. He could feel it. He could smell it. At first light, Marne unleashed his bolstered ranks, seizing the opportunity. Fresh French troops surged across fields still littered with splintered apple branches and shattered tiles pushing forward. German officers blinked in disbelief, astonished by the sudden influx of troops. Where had these men come from overnight, they wondered. The line groaned under the new weight, struggling to withstand the added pressure. Machine gun crews snapped bolts into place, their barrels spitting tracer until the metal glowed, a desperate defense. News of the taxis flashed across France and the world, inspiring people. Newspapers christened it the miracle of the Marne, a symbol of hope. Parisians toasted the drivers in cafes now lit with cautious hope, celebrating the moment. One caricature showed a taxi outracing a cavalry charge, a humorous depiction of the event. Another depicted Galeni tapping a meter for time bought in blood, a somber reminder of the cost. Strategically, The taxis moved only a few thousand men, but psychologically they moved millions, inspiring a nation. They proved Paris could improvise, endure and bite back, showing its resilience. Soldiers joked about the fare to the front, finding humor in the situation. Some kept the stubs as talismans, edges browned by sweat and cordite, a reminder of their experience. A lieutenant tucked his into his helmet band, murmuring, "I'll pay this when we're done," expressing his hope for the future. He never returned, becoming another casualty of the war. As dusk fell again, lanterns bobbed along the French lines, illuminating new trenches and bristling rifles, preparing for the next day. German patrols listened to muffled engines rumbling behind enemy hills, unsure what machines carried such resolve. They watched the horizon flare with gunfire and felt for the first time a tremor of doubt, sensing a shift in momentum. In the quiet hours that followed, Paris slept lightly, its dreams haunted by the war. Its veins had pulsed reinforcements into a front that refused to break, a testament to its strength. And along the river, the orchard leaves still trembled, not from wind, but from the distant rumble of wheels that would be etched forever into memory, a defining moment in the city's history. Above the Marne, smoke thinned to reveal a sliver of moon, silent witness to a city that had turned taxis into weapons and fear into forward motion, a remarkable transformation. Dawn peeled back the darkness over the Marne to reveal a battlefield already trembling. The stage set for another day of conflict. Maunuri's reinforced 6th Army struck again along Kluck's exposed flank, pressing their advantage, their bayonets gleaming as they crossed fields scoured by yesterday's fire, continuing the offensive. The first powdery volleys rolled across the orchards, rattling branches stripped bare, signaling the start of the day's fighting. German machine gun crews answered instantly, their weapons chewing through the morning haze, mounting a strong defense. Yet even precision has limits when the line behind you is hollowing out, facing a strategic disadvantage. Kluck's decision to reinforce the left had carved deep ridges into the German front, creating weaknesses. Each regiment pulled northward from his right, loosened the connection to Bülow's 2nd Army, further compromising their coordination. What had been a tight hinge now sagged into open air, a significant vulnerability. Staff maps still drew neat contact lines where infantry no longer stood, perpetuating a false sense of security. In headquarters, that illusion brought confidence, masking the true situation. On the ground, it brought catastrophe, leading to dire consequences for the German forces. The British Expeditionary Force advanced into this vacuum with measured steps, cautiously entering the undefended area. Scouts slipped between hedgerows and shallow ravines, rifles angled low, maintaining a defensive posture. They found fire-blackened farmhouses and scattered casings, but no rifles pointed back, confirming the lack of resistance. When they reached a low ridge and saw only empty fields where grey uniforms should have been, an officer felt his stomach drop, realizing the magnitude of their opportunity. He whispered to his adjutant, "God help them. They've overreached," understanding the gravity of the situation. Then he ordered his battalion forward, their boots thudding across dew-dark grass, seizing the advantage. Southward, the French 5th Army pivoted, hammering Bülow's strained flank, adding pressure to the already weakened German line. Artillery teams unlimbered on ridges, their guns coughing thunder into crossroads where German supply wagons jammed, disrupting their logistics. Horses buckled, drivers scrambled beneath splintering wheels, causing chaos and confusion. In the confusion, stretcher-bearers carried the wounded through clouds of dust that smelled of burned linen and cordite, highlighting the grim reality of war. The line groaned, then bent, unable to withstand the assault. Kluck counterattacked fiercely, determined to crack the French 5th before the noose tightened, trying to break through the Allied lines. His infantry surged forward in disciplined waves, helmets glinting like hammered bronze, presenting a formidable sight. They gained ground yards at a time until fresh French batteries roared from newly occupied high ground, halting their advance. Shells rained down, tearing trenches into ragged mouths, obliterating their gains. Forward momentum evaporated, their attack stalled. Men flattened themselves into earth, still warm from summer's sun, seeking protection from the artillery fire. Behind the front, telegraph wires hummed with frantic messages, conveying the urgency of the situation. Operators worked their keys as if staving off panic by rhythm alone, maintaining a semblance of control. Reports of widening gaps, collapsing junctions, and British columns threading deeper into open space clattered across the network, painting a picture of impending defeat. Joffre read them in silence, his fingertip tapping where two neat German arrows diverged, analyzing the strategic implications. With a single breath, he ordered every available corps into the seam, exploiting the opportunity to break the German line. The Germans felt the shift like pressure in the chest, sensing the growing danger. Their neat arc, once an elegant crescent cutting toward Paris, had kinked into an awkward angle, losing its symmetry and effectiveness. Columns marching north collided with columns retreating south, creating chaos and congestion. Entire regiments forced to halt on narrow roads, unable to maneuver effectively. Couriers galloped into dust clouds so thick they tasted grit on their tongues, facing difficult communication challenges. Officers argued over priority, their voices frayed by fatigue, struggling to maintain control. In the margins of war, friction becomes a weapon, exacerbating the difficulties. At sunset, the battlefield quieted to sporadic exchanges of rifle fire, a temporary lull in the fighting. French soldiers exhaled steam into the cooling air, staring across fields littered with apple branches and tattered knapsacks, surveying the damage. German infantry crouched behind hastily stacked stones, seeking cover, shoulders trembling, eyes dark from sleepless nights, exhausted and demoralized. Both sides understood they were no longer fighting for miles, but for structure itself, the very foundation of their armies. Night fell thick and moonless, plunging the battlefield into darkness. Lanterns bobbed through trenches like captive stars, casting long shadows against earthen walls, creating an eerie atmosphere. The hinge between two German armies, once taut with intention, had torn into an open corridor exposing a critical weakness. And in the quiet between artillery bursts, officers on both sides finally recognized what the terrain already knew, a profound realization. When a hinge snaps, the door does not simply sag, a slow and gradual decline. It swings wide, creating a significant opening, changing the entire dynamic. Far behind the front, in a quiet Luxembourg villa turned headquarters, Chief of Staff Helmuth von Moltke paced like a man trapped inside his own blueprint, overwhelmed by the situation. Maps hung on every wall, arrows swooping toward Paris, timetables stamped in precise handwriting, outlining the original plan. But couriers arrived breathless, their reports contradicting each other, adding to the confusion. Units went missing between ink and earth, lost in the fog of war. The elegant curve of the offensive had kinked into chaos, and Moltke's hands trembled, unable to cope with the unfolding events. He had already thinned the western wing to reinforce. In East Prussia, the plan's very success was being undermined. Gluck was veering inward, and Bülow was bending backward, stretching the German line past its breaking point. Staff officers noticed Moltke's voice cracking during briefings. He muttered about blood, accountability, and the judgment of history. The architect of the plan seemed to be crumbling under the weight of his own calculations. Unable to effectively command from a distance, Moltke dispatched Colonel Richard Hensch, a liaison officer, granting him unusual authority to speak on his behalf. Hensch traveled between field headquarters on dusty roads, passing ambulances swaying like wounded creatures. Upon reaching Bülow, he found the general pale, pointing to the widening gap on his map. Shellfire rattled the shutters. Hensch listened, frowned, and concurred that a withdrawal north of the Marne was necessary. Bülow reluctantly scribbled the orders into history. Hours later, Hensch confronted Gluck, whose troops had been making gains against the French Fifth Army. Gluck slammed his fist on the map table, insisting that victory was within reach. However, the gap behind him threatened to engulf two entire armies. Hensch, his voice betraying fatigue, invoked Moltke's authority. The order stood: retreat. Gluck stared at the order as if it were a sentence of doom. On the front lines, German columns began to pivot north. Engineers detonated bridges, stone arches collapsing into churning water. Supply wagons exploded in flames, their blasts echoing across villages like drums signaling retreat. Soldiers waded across rivers waist-deep, holding their rifles above their heads as the water tugged at their coats. Officers barked orders, their voices muffled by smoke and falling debris. The withdrawal was controlled, but only just. The Allied artillery seized the opportunity. French batteries pounded the crossings, shells raining down on wagon jams and turning crossroads into maelstroms of splintered wood and steel. British riflemen picked off targets from the hedgerows, their volleys as steady as metronomes. Medics dragged limp bodies behind farm walls, bandaging wounds that bled through the cotton faster than it could absorb. In Luxembourg, Moltke received word that Bülow and Kluck were pulling back. The room seemed to blur. Witnesses later recalled his face losing all color. He whispered that he had lost control of the battle and then closed his office door. Aides heard muffled sobs. Hours later, he wired Berlin a message that carried enough weight to shift the course of the war. The situation is extremely serious. The telegram's ripples spread through the capital like a chill. Ministers whispered about uncertainty, and newspapers printed cautious headlines. The promise of a 42-day victory, a swift knockout, was gone. Germany now faced a war of attrition, not maneuver. Along the Marne, however, retreat did not mean collapse. German regiments held rearguard positions with iron discipline, slowing the Allied pursuit with interlocking fields of fire. Officers sacrificed companies to save battalions. Every burning wagon and toppled bridge bought minutes measured in blood. By dusk, the German line had curved north in ragged order, bayonets bristling along shallow ridges. Exhausted soldiers dug shallow scrapes with the edges of their helmets, pressing their weight into the earth, as if hoping to become one with it. The final bridges detonated behind them in fountains of orange sparks. Night descended, thick and breathless. Fires crackled along the riverbanks, casting shadows that twitched like restless ghosts. In the flickering light, men stared across the dark water, hearing distant cheers from Allied platoons reclaiming empty ground. The sound deepened a wound more profound than any bullet. The German dream of Paris, of a swift war, the elegant plan, had vanished into smoke curling above the black water. What remained was heavier, slower, and far more terrifying. The realization that the war was no longer about movement, but about what could endure in the dark. The retreat from the Marne unfolded like a long, reluctant exhale, edged with pain. German columns withdrew in disciplined lines, boots thumping against the mud churned by artillery wheels. Engineers destroyed bridges behind them, stone arches collapsing into frothing water. The explosions echoed across the valleys, each detonation a sharp punctuation mark in a sentence the army no longer wanted to read. Allied guns harassed them from the high ground. French batteries sent shells crashing into crossroads, ripping supply wagons apart in clouds of splintered wood. British riflemen fired steadily from the hedgerows, their volleys crisp and unhurried. Medics dragged the wounded behind overturned carts, their hands slick with antiseptic and gore. Despite the pressure, the German infantry refused to break. Officers maintained order with clipped commands, their voices raspy with exhaustion. Logistics buckled under the strain. Horses collapsed in their harnesses, flanks heaving. Drivers stroked their muzzles before ending their suffering with a single shot. Bread hardened to brick. Water tasted of rusted canteens. Soldiers chewed in silence, their jaws stiff with fatigue. Rain turned the roads into brown rivers. Men learned to sleep standing, leaning against their rifles like exhausted sentries, guarding themselves. As the German line bent north, it found its spine on the ridges above the river. Officers traced firing arcs into the churned earth and ordered the shovels brought out. Soldiers dug first with their helmets, then with blistered hands, until deeper trenches began to take shape. Machine gun nests sprouted behind sandbags stacked like angled teeth. Artillery crouched behind the ridges. Barrels trained across the valleys where French columns were gathering. The Allies attacked anyway. French infantry advanced in tight formations up the slopes, bayonets gleaming like a promise. German machine guns opened fire from concealed emplacements, cutting the assault to pieces. Mortar shells tumbled into ravines with sickening thuds. Bodies slid down the wet grass, boots leaving streaks in the hillside. A few platoons gained a foothold at the crest, only to be swept aside by counterattacks wielding bayonets and grenades. Meanwhile, British troops probed the flanks. searching for a seam that no longer existed. Everywhere they turned, they found fresh digging, trenches zigzagging through vineyards and orchards, timber planking laid to keep boots out of the water, and wire entanglements humming in the wind. Officers stared, blinking at the transformation. Germany had not simply retreated, it had taken root. For days, the Allied assault hammered the ridge. Artillery barrages shuddered through the soil, flinging dirt and rock into the trenches. German soldiers endured the impacts from dugouts reinforced with doors ripped from farmhouses. Their ears rang, and their chests ached from the concussive waves. Still they rose when the bombardment lifted, rifles steady. By late September, the battle devolved into a blurred pattern: bombardment, assault, counterfire, silence. The ridge held. Couriers rode along the trench lines, delivering orders slick with rain. Telegraph keys chattered with clipped updates, each message more resigned than the last. Officers realized the truth. Pushing farther risked bleeding the army dry for mere scraps of ground. The attack slowed to wary observation. Then came the moment of grim recognition. The front had stopped moving. Men carved deeper shelters against the autumn chill. They stacked sandbags higher, reinforcing the parapets. Drainage channels were dug beneath firing steps. Field kitchens steamed behind earthen walls. Soldiers pinned talismans and photographs to timber supports, making homes out of holes in the earth. Across the valley, lanterns bobbed like faint floating stars. French patrols listened for German whispers. German sentries heard coughs drifting from the Allied side. In the eerie stillness, voices sometimes carried, songs muffled by distance, fragments of prayer swallowed by the wind. When the moon rose over the ridge, it revealed something uncanny. Two armies facing each other, not by maneuver, but by habit, locked into ground that would not yield. The speed of August had become the stalemate of September. Among the trenches, a private pressed his palm against the damp wall. The earth felt cold, unmoved by victory, indifferent to loss. For the first time, he understood that the war had changed shape, not broken, not ended, only sunk deeper. Autumn rains swept across the area, running in thin rivulets down the chalky slopes where German trenches were taking shape. What began as shallow scrapes deepened into fortified corridors, zigzagged to confound shrapnel and reinforced with timber ripped from barns. Men worked through the night, shovels clinking like muted bells. When dawn lit the valley, the German line no longer looked like an army in retreat, but a rooted wall of earth and wire. The French attacked again, driven by a doctrine that still revered the offensive. Bayonets flashed as companies climbed the ridge in tight formation, their voices swallowed by the reports of machine guns. Modern firepower punished bravery with impersonal efficiency. Mortars dropped shells into gullies where men crouched shoulder to shoulder, turning living cover into a crimson spray. Officers waved their troops forward, then ducked as shrapnel plowed furrows in the hillside. Down in the German trenches, soldiers hugged the firing steps, slick with rain. Riflemen fired through narrow slits, their muzzles coughing flame into the mist. Machine gunners cooled overheated barrels with wet cloths wrung from canteens. Artillery spotters scribbled coordinates on scraps of muddy parchment, relaying them through telephones that crackled like insects. The line bent beneath the assault, but did not break. As casualties mounted, disbelief rippled through the French ranks. Every charge left more bodies tangled in the wire, their uniforms soaked dark. Officers conferred behind shattered stone walls, staring at ridgelines that refused to yield. They adjusted timings, angled attacks, and called for fresh bombardments. None of it cracked the earthwork maze, now pulsing with German resolve. Pride and doctrine gave way to grim recalculation. Meanwhile, the British probed the flanks, searching for the mobility the battlefield had lost. They found trenches sprouting everywhere, communication ditches branching like roots, and reserve bunkers tucked into the hillside. Artillery duels rumbled from dawn till dusk, shells converging on crossroads and ravines. Smoke hung low, burning lungs and turning silhouettes into phantoms. The ground seemed to absorb the war rather than repel it. Days blurred into a rhythm: dig, fire, endure. Soldiers learned to recognize artillery by sound alone, the shriek of an incoming shell, the hollow thump of impact. Boots stayed perpetually damp. Letters arrived, smudged ink bleeding where the rain had seeped beneath the seals. Men pinned photographs inside dugouts, candlelight trembling over familiar faces. Rats grew fat on crumbs and corpses, their eyes glinting like beads in the lantern glow. A pattern settled over the valley. Each Allied offensive jolted the German line, only for counterfire to press it flat again. Trenches sank deeper. Duckboards were slotted into the mud. The ridge no longer belonged to armies, it belonged to the shovel. Dead ground multiplied with each crater, widening no man's land into a geography of hesitation. Officers exchanged glances, sharpened by fatigue. This ground would not be traded cheaply. By month's end, both sides halted assaults, not out of mercy, but out of depletion. The ridge smoldered beneath a quiet sky, strewn with broken rifles and apple branches splintered by shell fire. Patrols crouched low, their ears pricked for the scrape of wire cutters. Lanterns bobbed behind parapets like cautious fireflies, casting long shadows that stretched across trenches, carved deeper into the skin of France. In that hush, men finally saw what they had built. Not positions, not advantages, but walls between themselves and the world they remembered. A young private rested his forehead against the cold sandbags, listening to water dripping in the dark. The sound was steady, relentless, like the war itself. Above the valley, stars flickered through thinning smoke. Their light revealed trenches twisting toward horizons neither army could see past. Movement had given way to waiting. The war's front had not stalled simply in space. It had stalled in time. What followed was not silence, but a settling. Along the Aisne, both armies realized their plans had collided with the landscape itself. Trenches lengthened overnight, curling along ridgelines and riverbanks like roots seeking purchase. Engineers laid timber supports, stacked sandbags into parapets, and drove stakes for barbed wire that hummed softly in the wind. The battlefield, once fluid and wild, thickened into geometry. Angles of fire, arcs of observation, fields of death measured in meters. French commanders, still shaped by pre-war doctrine, ordered renewed assaults. At dawn, whistles shrilled and waves of infantry broke from cover. Their advance faltered against machine gun fire, hidden behind earthen lips. Shrapnel tore through the ranks, boots sliding on the wet clay as officers urged them up the slope. A few reached the German parapet, only to find bayonets waiting in tight, practiced jabs. Momentum drained into the mud, replaced by grim arithmetic. The British probed the flanks, seeking space to maneuver, but found only fresh trenches dug overnight. Wherever they shifted, the Germans mirrored them. Trenches twisted toward the Channel and the Swiss frontier, each side racing north to outflank the other. But every attempt ended the same way. New wire, new ditches, new lines. Maps lost color as staff officers inked new labyrinths across the countryside. The race to the sea became the birth of a cage. On the front lines, life contorted into routine. Men slept in dugouts carved from clay walls, sweating moisture into their blankets. Trench boards creaked under the constant rain. Cooks ladled thin stew from steaming cauldrons, the smell drifting through the narrow corridors of earth. Rats feasted on scraps and on bodies not yet retrieved. Their eyes glinted in the lantern light, indifferent to uniform. Soldiers killed them with trench knives and tossed them aside, only for others to scurry forward. Morale oscillated with rumor. Whispers spread of gas shells, armored shields, and monstrous artillery. Letters from home became talismans. The ink-smudged corners were softened by hands that needed to remember tenderness. Priests moved through the trenches, offering rites in quiet nooks where the walls seemed to lean in and listen. Sometimes at night, a harmonica drifted across no man's land. German sentries replied with a violin's thin, aching note. For a moment, the war breathed like a memory. Higher up the chain, strategies hardened. Staff colleges had never taught how to break an army buried 10 feet deep. Artillery barrages flattened the ground, but rarely cracked the parapets. Infantry attacks dissolved into smoke and wire. Generals spoke of attrition, of wearing the enemy down until something inside snapped. Newspapers printed victory rhetoric, but the soldiers felt the truth in their bones. The war had buried its teeth into the soil. Industry answered the generals' new ambitions. Factories roared to life, forging shells faster than they could be fired. Women stepped into workshops, sleeves rolled past their elbows, sparks dancing at their feet. Coal trains screamed through mountain passes. Economists muttered about steel quotas. The war had outgrown the men who fought it. Now nations themselves marched to the front. One evening, the rain softened into mist. French patrols slipped through the tall grass, their ears tuned to the metallic tink of German wire posts being hammered into place. They withdrew silently, knowing that tomorrow's assault would meet new teeth. In dugouts, young soldiers stared at ration tins stamped with factory insignia. They had imagined glory. Now they imagined warmth. By October's first frost, the lines had anchored into permanence. Officers walked the parapets with clipped warnings. Keep your heads low, watch the wire, trust the shovel. The shovel proved the most important weapon of the month. Its edge carved shelter from artillery, built platforms for machine guns, and buried comrades before sunrise. At dusk, a British lieutenant leaned on the lip of his trench, peering across the silent valley. Lanterns glimmered along the German line, close enough to touch with his imagination. He exhaled, his breath ghosting into the cold air, and whispered to no one. We are not moving again soon. Beyond the wire, the night thickened. Dew collected on the twisted barbs, each droplet catching starlight like a jewel on the teeth of something waiting. The Marne had saved Paris, but it had chained Europe to the earth. In the dark, the trenches breathed, and the war exhaled into stillness, settling deeper into the soil it would refuse to leave. By mid-autumn, the Western Front resembled a wound scabbed over in steel and clay. Both armies, having lunged and counter-lunged across the Marne, now sank into positions carved by necessity. Command posts huddled in farm cellars. Observation balloons hovered like tethered ghosts above the mist. Staff officers studied maps whose inked lines no longer suggested motion, only depth. The war had entered a phase the textbooks never taught. French doctrine still clung to the offensive. The order of the day remained attack. Columns loaded grenades and fixed bayonets, then surged uphill through sleet and smoke. Machine guns shredded their momentum in seconds, snapping men backward as if pulled by invisible ropes. Artillery scoured the slopes, wreathing the battlefield in a grey haze that made orientation a luxury. Officers tried to rally with whistles and sabres, but modern warfare had no patience for silhouettes. German defensive doctrine hardened by the hour. Engineers reinforced sapheads, forward nibs of trench meant to listen, probe and pressure. Mortars dropped shells into ravines where French squads crawled for shelter. When the Allied artillery ceased, German infantry leapt onto the fire steps and poured volleys downhill. Their rifles cracked with mechanical rhythm, each shot stitched into the tapestry of attrition. Between assaults, patrols crawled through no-man's land mud, clinging to their elbows and chin straps. They clipped enemy wire, ghosted trenches, and listened for whispers through the dark. A single cough could betray a platoon. Sometimes a startled bird took flight. Rifles snapped up instinctively, firing into blackness that swallowed bullets without a sound. The night itself felt predatory. Inside the dugouts, trench life acquired a shape. Water pooled ankle deep. Duckboards floated like tired boats beneath boot soles. Letters from home arrived smelling faintly of lavender or coal smoke, their corners softened by the rain. Cigarettes passed between fingers, shared like communion. Lice thrived along collars. Trench fever spread with the stealth of rumored joints, aching eyes fever bright beneath the mud. High command demanded breakthroughs. Reality offered stalemate. Staff briefings read like prayers. Heavy artillery preparation. Rolling barrages, creeping advances measured in meters. Economics intruded. Shell shortages dictated battle rhythm. Coal trains became lifelines. Governments requisitioned factories, turning sewing floors into shell press lines and carriage shops into artillery forges. Women stepped behind lathes, their hair tied back beneath kerchiefs, sparks snapping at their sleeves. New weapons whispered from the edges of doctrine. Rifle grenades, trench mortars, shields bolted to stocks, experiments scribbled into muddy margins. Commanders spoke of combined arms as if invoking a charm, but each innovation seemed to lengthen the trench lines rather than crack them. The battlefield swallowed ideas whole, digesting them into deeper frustration. The race to the sea continued, armies pivoting northward. seeking open land to outflank their mirrored rivals. Towns changed hands only to dissolve beneath artillery that leveled church spires and schoolhouses alike. When cavalry found open country, it rarely stayed open for long. By dawn, trenches spread like ivy along the fields, binding maneuver into immobility. On a cold evening, the mist pulled across no man's land. A lone harmonica drifted from the French side, soft, wandering notes. A violin answered from the German trenches, its tone thin, earnest, and trembling. For a moment, men on both sides lowered their chins, the music threading through helmets and wire. Then the last note faded, leaving a silence more suffocating than gunfire. In headquarters, far behind the ridge, officers added new phrases to their vocabulary: attrition, industrial capacity, national endurance. The war had shed its romantic illusions. It now demanded economies, minerals, factory shifts, and bodies. No timetable could tame it. At dawn, a French sergeant peered over the parapet. Dew jeweled the barbed wire in front of him, each droplet catching the sunrise like sparks frozen mid-flight. He exhaled slowly, frost blooming in the air. The line did not move, but every day it consumed. While the trenches bit deep into France, the Eastern Front heaved with movement and shock. In East Prussia, German commanders leveraged railroads like arteries, pulsing fresh divisions into threatened sectors. The result was a brutal symphony of encirclement. At Tannenberg, Russian units found themselves cut off by precise maneuvers. Entire columns vanished into forests littered with abandoned guns and shattered wagons. Prisoners marched west in endless files, silent, frost-breathed silhouettes swallowed by the pines. Barely weeks later, the Masurian Lakes campaign delivered another hammer blow. Shells burst across the wetlands, showering reeds and icy spray. Russian infantry retreated through the boggy ground, rifles held high, boots sucking into the mud that refused to release its grip. Only the astonishing pace of their withdrawal prevented total annihilation. Officers burned maps to deny intelligence, flames wavering in the wind howling across the lake ice. Yet Russia struck back against Austria-Hungary with devastating force. In Galicia, sprawling battles chewed through regiments on both sides. Artillery turned wheat fields into scarred craters. Austrian command fractured, its logistics snarled by distance and shattered rail lines. Casualties mounted into six figures. Entire corps fell back toward the Carpathians, their uniforms caked with clay and defeat. News raced through Vienna, a whisper swelling into dread. Politicians logged casualty lists that stretched across tables. Telegrams arrived in curt, unfeeling script. Lost, missing, wounded, unrecoverable. In small towns, church bells tolled until the ropes frayed, and mothers clutched letters smudged by their tears. The Eastern War lacked the symmetry of trenches. Instead, it sprawled like wildfire, fanned by rail timetables and desperate gambles. It was movement at knife point. Still, the victories in Prussia steadied German fears. Panic over endless Russian hordes receded. Newspapers celebrated commanders as saviors of the fatherland. But on the southern flank, Austria-Hungary staggered, its pride battered, its lines crumbling under Russian pressure. Chief of Staff Konrad von Hötzendorf, an architect of early aggression, now muttered regrets behind closed doors. His subordinates whispered that if Archduke Franz Ferdinand were alive, Konrad would face a court-martial or worse. Diplomats sensed the shifting gravity. In London, Paris, and Petrograd, negotiations crystallized into the Pact of London. No separate peace. If this war was to be survived, it would be survived together. Cabinets signed with hands that trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. The conflict was not months long. It was epical. Back on the Western Front, officers read dispatches by candlelight. Russian losses, Austrian collapse, German panic eased, French exhaustion deepened. The war's geometry expanded. Now a continent's lungs heaved with every maneuver. In the muddy trenches, corporals traded rumors as readily as cigarettes. They imagined eastern cities falling like dominoes, though few could pronounce their names. Artillery flashes in France echoed the chaos of Galicia. Soldiers felt the consequences, not just in their own valleys, but on fronts hundreds of miles away. The battlefield had become an organism, and nerves ran across borders. pressure in Poland meant relief on the Marne. A breakthrough near Lviv tugged at timetables in Champagne. Strategy was now continental. One night, a German sergeant unfolded a newspaper clipping mailed from home. It bore a headline celebrating the Masurian victory. Lantern glow flickered across his tired face. "Good," he muttered. "We need something." His companion nodded and stared into the darkness, imagining vast forests he'd never see, where men like him bled into the snow. Distant thunder rolled along the ridges of the Western Front, not weather but artillery. Above the parapet, barbed wire glistened with dew, each droplet reflecting tiny hints of firelight. On one side, the trenches sank deeper. On the other, armies still moved like storms. Together they sharpened a truth no one yet dared speak. The West had frozen, but the East still turned the blade. The failure at the Marne rippled outward, like a stone dropped into deep water. What had been conceived as a swift, crushing war, the Schlieffen plan's elegant sweep around Paris, had collapsed into a retreat hardened by trenches. On the ridges above the Aisne, German infantry dug deeper, the spade becoming as vital as the rifle. Earth absorbed the shock of artillery. Parapets of sandbags turned bullets aside. The front line stopped moving, and with it something inside every soldier shifted. Allied armies hurled themselves against these new defenses. French infantry surged up the slopes under the weight of doctrine, their officers still preaching that audacity could conquer geometry. Machine guns answered that belief coldly. British battalions probed north and south, hoping to slip around the ridge, only to find trenches sprouting like weeds overnight. The race to the sea ended not in breakthrough, but in walls, a continuous scar of wire and earth curling from the Channel to Switzerland. Behind the lines, quartermasters ground through sleepless nights. Generals traded the language of maneuver for attrition. Factories rumbled to life, forging shells in endless rhythms, clouds of smoke darkening the sky even in cities far removed from the battle lines. Coal trains shrieked as they crossed bridges. Steel mills glowed like the open throats of volcanoes. The war was no longer about cavalry charges or clever flanking maneuvers. It was now a war of industry, of hunger, and of time itself. Governments felt the pressure mounting. Budgets simply vanished. Ration cards became commonplace. Censorship became ingrained, a hard habit. The Pact of London, a solemn promise of no separate peace, bound France, Britain, and Russia together in a marriage, one defined not by trust or affection, but by a shared fear of standing alone. Cabinets held hushed discussions of manpower, food supply curves, tonnage, and the crucial matter of winter coal. Diplomats exchanged smiles that were as sharp and dangerous as knives. In the trenches, the world had shrunk to mere meters. Men could distinguish between incoming and outgoing artillery shells by the sound they made. Rats feasted on discarded biscuit crumbs and the corpses of the dead without any sense of discrimination. Lice burrowed deep into uniform collars. Letters from home became precious lifelines. The creased pages carried faint scents of soap or wood smoke from the hearth. Between transports, soldiers stared intently at photographs, pinning them to the timber supports of the trenches. Candle stubs flickered, casting light on the faces of loved ones waiting in another life, across the desolate expanse of no man's land. Lanterns blinked along both parapets as night patrols cautiously crawled through grass slick with dew, their ears acutely attuned to the sound of the wire singing in the wind. Once, the mournful notes of a French harmonica drifted into the darkness, and a German violin responded with a fragile, trembling melody. That brief thread of music lingered in the air, in a space where artillery had only recently ploughed deep furrows, then faded into silence, a silence too cold to sustain it. Far away in hospital wards, nurses tirelessly washed blood from stretchers until their wrists ached and felt numb. Doctors stared in disbelief at new kinds of wounds, wounds that their textbooks had never prepared them for. Families stood in long lines before notice boards, their breath fogging the glass as they desperately searched for names. Factory girls walked wearily home beneath smoke-blackened skies, their lanterns swinging like tired stars. By the time the first frost of winter arrived, the front lines had frozen, both literally and figuratively. Officers surveyed the mud walls that now seemed to bear the weight of the entire continent's anxieties. No timetable offered any hope of relief. No clever maneuver offered any chance of escape. Soldiers spoke in hushed whispers about spring, though none of them truly knew what the idea of spring even meant anymore. One cold dawn, a corporal rested his chin on his folded arms at the top of a sandbag parapet. In the dim, grey light, the barbed wire glistened, each tiny droplet of moisture catching the sunrise like beads threaded along a crown of thorns. Beyond it, the German line shimmered faintly, silent and watchful. The corporal exhaled and his breath drifted like smoke into the frozen air. He could not physically see Paris or Berlin or Galicia, but he felt the immense weight of all of them, pressing through the soil beneath his boots. What the Marne had prevented was a swift, decisive victory. What it had delivered instead was something far heavier: permanence. The war, which should have been over in a matter of weeks, now stretched like a long, dark shadow across the seasons, swallowing millions of lives, one shell, one ration, one trench at a time. And as the sun climbed higher over the barbed wire, glinting on frost and steel alike, Europe settled into a grim posture, one it would be unable to escape for 4 long and agonizing years, bent low, unblinking, teeth clenched tightly against the park.